Can you tell me whether there are countries at the present time that recognize and supervise the Bitcoins?
Several countries in which Bitcoin use has been recognized in many different ways at different levels of the legislative process or judicial process, in terms of recognizing, in fact, that Bitcoin is money, that it is subject to the same rules and regulations around taxation and operation, that with it also carries certain liberties such as freedom of association and freedom of expression. And so within many countries, Bitcoin fits comfortably within the existing system for currencies. However, I don't know that that has required specific legislation or that any country has legislated specifically for Bitcoin.
Une très courte question sur une question. A very short question on a matter that was raised previously. If Senator Ringgit were to issue a Ringgit coin this week, and if our chair had his Bitcoin for a number of months already, I'd like to know what the value of one in relation to the other would be.
So the various currencies that exist out there are related to each other based on a free-floating market rate. And that market rate is determined by trade between individuals on exchanges where those currencies can be sold and bought for each other. This is exactly the same mechanism with which the exchange rate between the Canadian dollar and the US dollar is determined, or between any currency in the modern world. So all of these currencies have a free-floating market value. I would argue that with that, if there is very low liquidity in that market, it will be very difficult to establish a price that is representative of the value of that currency, and price discovery will be difficult and in fact will lead to very, very large volatility. As Bitcoin and other currencies get larger, the volatility decreases. In fact, the volatility of Bitcoin today is not at all dissimilar from the volatility of oil during the first decade of the discovery that oil could be used as a substitute fuel instead of, say, whale oil that was used at the time. We see this with new technologies where as the market develops, it starts off with tremendous volatility. But over time, as the amount of volume and liquidity in the markets increases, the volatility is reduced until these currencies become extremely stable. For a global currency, a $5 billion valuation is tiny. And so I would expect that Bitcoin will remain volatile for many years to come.
I think that Senator Ringgit can give some thought then to this $5 billion. There was a subject that was discussed, namely the matter of security in the use of Bitcoins. We are parliamentarians here. We are doing this study within a parliament that, after this particular committee, I'll be sitting on the finance committee. I'd be interested in knowing when it comes to the control that governments might be able to exercise. If all operations are conducted in Bitcoin and the value is constantly changing, how would a government be able to exercise its fiscal power?
Well, the citizens of that government would exercise direct control over the currency through their own purchasing decisions and through ownership control over their own units of currency. So in many cases, as I mentioned before, Bitcoin is not unregulated. It is regulated both by mathematics as well as dynamic markets that exist among its participants and users. Both the price of Bitcoin, its value in commercial transactions, and the use to which it's put is managed directly by the end user. And those end users arguably are the same constituents. So if the constituents can apply direct control over the currency, they will do so.
My last question then. We talked about the value in the month of June, and we'll be making our tax return in April. What value would be used if we wanted to be able to make a conversion to for tax authorities, because of course it is necessary to file a tax return. It is necessary to establish a value, and if there is a serious amount of fluctuation, I realize that the quantities are not high. There aren't that many taxpayers who have huge incomes. Let's say the average Canadian earns $45,000 a year. What would the value that would be attributed to the revenue from January, February, March, and so forth? How would it be possible to monitor or control this type of declaration of income or revenue?
That is a very interesting question, and one area where regulatory clarity would be extremely useful. I earn the vast majority of my income directly in Bitcoin, and since October of last year, I have earned very little in terms of national currencies. I get paid in Bitcoin, and I pay many of my expenses directly in Bitcoin. For the purposes of taxation, I treat the Bitcoin as earnings in a foreign currency, just as if I was doing contract work for a European company and being paid in euros. I will assess the market value of the transaction when I earn the income at that current market price, and then I will render taxes to the tax authority in the national currency, which is, after all, the primary power of the tax authority is to force the users to pay in the currency of their choice. What becomes difficult is that in the case of use of currency, the classification in the tax code depends on the use I have. For example, if I use my brokerage account to purchase euros for investment purposes, and I sell those euros 2 months later and realize a gain, I will be subject to capital gains tax upon that gain. However, if I visit Paris and I use euros to pay for a ticket to the local Paris zoo, and the price of the value of euro changes between the moment I purchase that amount with my own currency and the moment I paid for the ticket, I'm not assessed capital gains. It is considered a currency use, and therefore it is treated differently. And the tax code is flexible enough to allow me to declare the appropriate use for the appropriate tax classification depending on how I used it. Now, at the moment in the United States, at least, there's been a ruling that says that Bitcoin operates as a commodity with capital gains taxation, which is, in my opinion, the wrong answer. However, if Bitcoin had been classified purely as a currency, that would have been the wrong answer too. The correct answer, in my opinion, is it depends on how it is used. If it is used for long-term investment, then it is subject to, obviously, capital gains and losses. If it is used for consumer spending, then it operates as a currency and means of exchange. And the tax system allows me to declare upon honor how I've used the currency, and to then impose penalties if I have made that declaration incorrectly. That's how it works with every other currency. So this is an area where clarity would be extremely useful, because it would allow us to use currency such as Bitcoin in the same way that we use currencies from all over the world.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.